All right, hey everybody, it's Tony Zayas. Andy Helko is my partner. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Tony?
I'm doing great, thank you. The Mohawks
Anything
looking pretty
new
good
on
today.
anything new on your background that we haven't seen before?
I hope so. I think
You gotta
hopefully
start.
they'll.
Yeah.
I have to. Yeah, I got to censor that at some point, possibly if the need arises.
Stop drawing dirty pictures back there. Is all I can tell
Yep. So welcome everybody. This is the SaaS Founder Show. Again, I'm Tony Zayas. Andy Helko is our founder at Incivia. And we have a special guest today. This is second week of our live show, so we're excited about these, to be able to do these live. And just to let everyone know, if you have a question, a comment, and you're watching live, then by all means, go ahead and just type in the comment section. We get kind of a unified feed depending on where you're viewing this. We'll be able to see the responses, and we'll get to those. But with all of that, let me go ahead and let's bring on our guest for today. We have Evan Schneier from Outlaw. Evan, how are you doing?
Hi guys, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, real good, thank you.
Yeah, we're doing fantastic.
Yeah, so this show, we like to talk to different SaaS founders, just hear a little bit about their story. And so I guess I'll just kind of kick things off and just ask you a question, and we're happy for the conversation to go wherever it goes. But you got a pretty interesting background, so we really want to learn all about Outlaw and dive into, some of the other experiences you've had and the things you've done along the way. But I would love to hear something that you talked about in your LinkedIn profile was just how you're pretty passionate about building great teams. And I'm just wondering how that interest and that being something that you really enjoy doing, how does that parlay into your work at Outlaw? And something I saw at the site was your core values, and I thought those were interesting. So I'd love to hear how that plays into it.
Yeah, sure. I think that I do. It's kind of a byproduct of for me, I'm a product guy, and so it's always kind of the product idea and the business idea come first, and the team kind of rallies around that purpose. And then I tend to realize pretty early on, and I've done this, I don't know, depending on what I count, 3 or 4 times now, kind of full cycle. And pretty early on, after it gets to maybe 2 or 3 people, even just starting from some co-founders, that can't be the purpose. You need kind of a purpose to rally around, but that's a very, very close second. And it's just, we're going to be spending so much time and energy and focus doing this thing, whatever this thing is, that you got to be doing it with people you love and supporting each other. And there's really no place for ego and for kind of internal competitiveness, especially on a startup. You're kind of, the world is against you already just because you don't exist yet. And so you got to band together. And that experience is really, it's just really a delight, I would say. It's very challenging as well, especially now with kind of startup culture becoming mass, I would say. There's a lot of people who think they want to do a startup or think they're ready for a startup who are not. And vice versa. Those are some of my favorites. People who never had that ideal, and kind of just are looking for a job or something, and then they fall into it, and they just really take to it, and they love the uncertainty, or maybe not the uncertainty, but they just adapt very, very fast. And those are some of the best people. And then of course there are people who, I guess like myself, who have to be our own bosses and have to be founders and can't really work for anyone else and be happy. But yeah, and actually on the team side, we recently hit a personal milestone for me, which is that we are now at 14. Our total team size is 14, and my first startup, Wanderfly, we peaked at 13. Cool. Not that is not a primary success metric, but it's just only something I realized as a byproduct of our growth and where we're doing. So that was a cool realization to have.
Yeah, it's interesting with that number of people. So I've had my business now for 18 years, and I'll tell you, the first half of the business, it was, I don't know, there was something inside me that said, oh, it's about the number of people. And I think as I've matured and got older, there are obviously different things about culture and profit that come into it. And so I think more the interesting fact is kind of your evolution as a founder too. And for people that are just starting out, of like what you determine success means for yourself, and so, I mean, and I'd be kind of curious to turn that into a question of, how do you define success now for yourself and moving into the future now that you've had a couple experiences and different things like that?
Yeah, I'll say how I define success. Again, Outlaw is kind of true to form for me in terms of being a product and kind of problem oriented thing. Dan and I came together several years ago around just this frustration around contracts and wanting to just make the whole experience better for everyone. And so, there's several, initially success is, can we actually build what we're envisioning? Can we get it to market? Can we start getting customers? At this point, I would say success is actually kind of a boring answer, which is just making a real business, like becoming viable. And it's actually funny. I talked to a ton of VCs. We have a lot of interest, and we haven't raised a Series A yet, but we're going to, I think, pretty soon. And we have a lot of inbound interest, and they kind of ask that same question. The VCs tend to require the word billions to show up somewhere in that answer. And I'm like, yeah, we'll get there. It's a huge, huge market, and we're really well positioned. But right now, success is actually, now that we have real customers that we're serving, they're happy, they're growing, we're getting more customers, we have a sales pipeline, that just kind of boring answer of success being a successful business, as in operating at a profit, which is supposed to be the goal of any business, or maybe not the goal, but a fundamental goal. And it's very polarizing, actually. I'd say most VCs are like, we don't care about that. It's growth at all costs.
I know. Such an interesting market of the startup community and how they look at profit versus, just scale.
Yeah.
I'd love you to introduce the business, but real quickly, you mentioned purpose. You used that word of developing purpose. I'm huge about that. I've spent years trying to think about our culture and values and really putting a lot behind that. So how have you developed purpose and, that thing that you get these people rallied behind to be excited to grow the company?
Yeah, I mean that evolves over time. I think as our market and our customers change, it still starts with the same essence, which again kind of was this just deep frustration with the way contracts work. And I should mention just real quick, so I'm a second time. Well, I've got several other businesses, but I'm a second time kind of tech startup co-founder, and my dad is a retired general counsel. And so I've been around contracts a lot in my career and even before that. And it's always, as a software developer as well, it's always struck me that this is a perfect scenario for software to really, really help. And yet it's not. It's the typical way contracts are done. I guess I can count Microsoft Word as software, but it's kind of so general purpose. And it's not built for the type of structure that contracts demand. And so kind of getting back to your question about purpose, just that was the original purpose, and still is a big part of the purpose, is, as Dan, my co-founder, likes to say, building the right tool for the job. The job of doing a contract is very structured. There's workflow, there's lots of people involved, there's permissions, there's redlining, there's all these, we kind of mapped out the whole process. And the tools that people use traditionally for that job are just not the right ones. They're too general. So kind of the original purpose of building the right tool for the job. And again, that kind of evolves. Initially, the purpose is just building the actual thing, building the tool. Then the purpose is getting that tool into the hands of people to actually use it and see if we did it right. Now I'd say, now that we have what I would characterize as product market fit with kind of a real customer base, in the mid-market tier, which is just not huge businesses necessarily, but businesses of, call it 50 to 500 employees and up, and where there's a big team around who need to touch contracts in some way, shape, or form. And we've got a bunch of these kind of customers just who have a contract process, and they've got a sales team of 20 people or whatever it is, and in-house counsel of a few people and C-level, so a bunch of people who have this problem set and have this need. The pleasure of serving these people and seeing them get value out of it and paying us for the technology, for the software, and continuing, and then renewing and growing. That is so validating. It's just a delight, honestly. So I know you can see just how genuinely I feel that. Dan feels the same way, and that I think our whole team, both sales and marketing and product, just kind of revels in that purpose together.
Yeah, it's awesome. I have to admit, I have a really good friend that owns a law firm, and he never goes anywhere without a file folder, 3 colored pens, and 5 different colored highlighters.
Yeah. And
quite literally, you will always see him with that tool set. So I know what you're talking about. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we have in our, I think it was our original seed fundraising deck, we had an actual picture of the results of that process of a contract where one it was actually from a real estate transaction that we had done, where one lawyer had crossed something out and written no. And the other side crossed out the no and wrote no again.
Great. Contracts and from the consumer side, for me, not even a lawyer, contracts are like the thing that I avoid. Like anytime we have to deal with them as I have to get an attorney involved, or I have to read one over myself. It's like, this is the worst day of my life that I have to look through this document.
Exactly. And then, there's actually a kind of part of the original product vision. Dan is a UX designer and visual designer. And so he's done a ton of freelance work, and similar to you, he's used to kind of being the recipient of a contract and just eyes glaze over, he's going back to whatever the verbally agreed on rate was and trying to find it in the fine print. And so one of the very first manifestations of the product vision was actually an overview layer, kind of like a cover sheet, to just basically explain the thing in English and improve that recipient experience, not to replace the contract, but just kind of package it up nicely so that the sender can actually, maintain a good relationship with you. And originally, and that was actually in the very first version of any version of Outlaw. And we only very recently, and what we found was it was the right, it is a very valuable feature, and we put that overview layer on all of our contracts because we know it actually helps to get a deal done. It helps to keep people aligned, make sure that no one's trying to get one by anyone. But it wasn't until actually very recently that we started seeing requests for that feature, and people or clients who actually have been using it for a year and a half and heard on a product video or something, heard us talking about that and said, that would be helpful. And so we our CS team is funneling those feature requests our way. And we're like, yes, overviews, someone is using the original essence of why we built this thing. That's very,
I was going to say, can you have a slider bar for me that's like, summarize it at a 3rd grade level, or 5th grade level, and then that way I can just slide it down to like 1st grade, and it's like, contract good.
You're going actually even back to like pre-alpha prototype level. We had this crazy idea of like almost like a Google Maps with zoom levels of detail. Mm-hmm. Whereas like, at a high level, here's a 1 sentence thing of what you're agreeing to, and then you drill in, and then here's the one pager, and here's the whole, and that was way too much, way too much work and way too heady. But yeah, the idea is, and that's just that feature is just, it's optional at this point. A lot of customers, it's they have their contract and they're just like, let's just use this thing, but it is still central in that original vision of just end to end, making the whole thing better for everyone, from sender to people generating it, to people getting internal approvals on a draft to send out, and then especially the recipient. I think that's actually also because of that feature where it's one of the major differentiators. To some degree, just our user experience overall is really, really seamless and even enjoyable to use, which is not a word that usually is associated with contracts. But it's really essential in just kind of focusing on the recipient and their experience and considering them kind of a first-class citizen with respect to just the overall contract life cycle is not something we see anyone else doing, because they're not the paying customer. The paying customer is the sender.
Right.
But we can serve our senders better if we help them give their recipients and their counterparties a good experience.
Yeah.
So you've kind of hinted at your origin story a couple of times. Your dad being general counsel, some of your past experience, this idea of the, your pain with contracts. But can you really talk about like that, period of time of the epiphany and, why you said, okay, this is such a pain and I have this much knowledge. Yes, let's start something.
Yeah. So the idea came several years before starting it. The idea, I always had that general sense of like, there's a better way to do this. And every time I did contracts with Wanderfly, my first startup from 2009 to 2012, just always had that frustration. But it was so far. It was a travel business, and it was so far from what we were doing. It wasn't like I was going to jump in and try and solve that then. But we were fortunate to find an exit in that first experience, and we were ultimately acquired by TripAdvisor. And that process, it was just a bigger, more glorified version of the same thing. It was a lot of talking, you kind of get to that verbal agreement stage with more stakeholders, obviously, but you agree on price and agree on just high level terms, and then you sign a term sheet. And I'd say from first discussion to signed term sheet, and the term sheet is in English. The term sheet is kind of like that overview layer that I was talking about. And for an acquisition, it's still a couple of pages, but like it's readable. It's in English. Everyone pretty much gets what's going on. And then going from the term sheet to I think the final definitive agreement for the transaction was like 150 pages or something. That took another 7 or 8 weeks. And was just so frustrated by that experience that I really found, by the time we signed that, I was like, this is the next thing. This is the next thing I'm going to do. I'm exhausted, so I'm not going to do it right now. I need to kind of maybe take a step out of the startup grind for a few years and recoup energy, recoup funds. And so I knew I had that idea from exiting my first startup, I'd say, to start this next one. And then it was a few years later when I met Dan, and like I said, he had a lot of similar frustrations just with the process of contracts, and we actually had already started working together on just some freelance work and projects. So we knew we could work together well. And also designer, he's a designer, I'm a coder, and so that's a pretty good pairing for a co-founding team. So we kind of started kicking around this idea, and we actually went pretty deep in just kind of UX, not like a formal UX research thing, but just we really mapped out the whole process that I was talking about. We thought about how contracts work from his perspective as a frequent recipient, from mine as a sender or kind of almost admin of just various types of deals. And we have a lot of friends and family in the agency world. So just lots of knowledge about how kind of regular business contract cycles work. And we mapped out a whole thing at an upstate kind of pre-founding retreat. It's one of those things where like you can date from lots of different times. There's the incorporation date, but there's the like 9 months before that you were working on it, and then there's like 6 months before that you were thinking about it and talking about it. So I don't know where our official moment of inception came, but it was somewhere 2015, 2016.
That's awesome. I'm kind of curious real quickly, we get a number of founders. We've talked to a number of founders. I talked to a number, and we're really a big part of this audience is startups and people that are looking to potentially start up. So the exit process, since you've been through it, mm-hmm. Everybody looks at it as like this amazing, oh, I'm so, that's the pie in the sky. This is going to be amazing. I have some friends that have been through it, and I've heard the experience. So tell me, what is the, misnomer? What don't people really understand about that process?
That's too broad.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's the biggest, thing the one thing you could take away that's like, this is not what you think it is?
Let's see. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is that it's an elaborate transaction. There's lots of different stakeholders in any exit scenario, and we were pretty early. We were at the time of acquisition. I think we were 7 on the employee side. I think we had around 15 total investors, a combination of VCs and angels, and then there's the stakeholders at the buying company, which in our case, the kind of champion was the head of product. C-suite was involved. There was corporate development, whose job is to kind of do the deal and get it done. And then, of course, there's teams of lawyers on both sides. So you're talking about 40 plus stakeholders, and that's for a small one. Uh-huh. So one takeaway is that you've got to be really clear and hopefully get it into the contract of kind of what the plan is, not just the transaction, but what's the business plan after that. And that runs the gamut. There are talent acquisitions where from the start, it's like, we don't care about your brand or product. We just want the team. There's kind of other end of the spectrum where it's like, I'd say that maybe YouTube is a great example where it's like, this is an amazing thing. We just want to own it, but we're going to build it and grow everything and keep everything totally intact. And then there's like everything in between. And I think because of the complexity of the transaction, even financials aside, that can change, and not with anyone's intention. It can just, what one person thinks the plan is, two people can be aligned at one moment, and then you get to term sheet, and then you're way deep into it, and things change, or someone else has more power at a certain point. So it can really, really morph without any malice or anything on either side. It can just change a lot. So I'd say kind of going back to that purpose thing to, this is one of those kind of pieces of advice that's impossible to follow, at least certainly on the founder side, it's impossible to follow. It's going to say, be really clear and pointed about that purpose and know why you're selling your company. It's impossible to follow because when someone comes knocking on the door and wants to buy your company, the party music, as I like to say, just starts blaring in my head, and it's hard to hear over that sometimes. But yeah, like to go back to that, know what you're doing, know what you want to achieve out of it, and be really clear and forward about that. And hopefully that's exactly what the buyer wants too, and even if it is, that might not be where you land in 6 months post transaction, but at least I'd say you have better odds.
Yeah. I had a client that went through the buyout process, and one of the big things was, what he wanted to do after. And, they wanted to lock him in for 5 years with an earnout, and it's, he wanted less time so that he could move on to other things. And then you get into, that even just gets complicated of, what do you want your life to look like after this exit?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And also I think as we're in new territory for me personally, not just on a team size, but just in terms of business viability. We have a real business here in the works. And we're also starting, and we've started, some acquirers are knocking. I've managed to tamp down the party music to keep on course. But it's interesting that the personal trajectories can start to diverge from the business trajectory, and that's okay. And actually, I think that's something that even VCs have talked to me about. I've had some really, really positive and really frank conversations with them, especially as Series A tends to get big. It's just getting bigger and bigger. And a number of VCs are cognizant of that and even advocate for founders taking some money off the table, even in an A. Not fuck you money, as they say from, I think I'm blanking on the movie that coined that, but
is it Goodfellas?
No, I can picture. It's not gonna come to me. But something to take to de-risk a little bit, to have a personal win, and not be 100% still tied up in the company. And then others, one of the acquirers who one of the inbound acquisition inquiries kind of spoke to the other end, and they said like they buy companies to grow them, but they have options for founders to just exit, and they say we know how to go from the stage that you're at to bigger, and to probably then resell it later for a multiple is their goal. But it's totally fine for if the founders want to stay on, awesome. If they want to take something off the table, then that can be worked out. And I think that's it's certainly a good discussion to have. It's really good it's kind of liberating to be able to think of it that way, and not just think, what I want personally has to be what is right for Outlaw. And as Outlaw, it's kind of, I'm not a parent, but I have a lot of friends who are parents, and there's a lot of parallels. It's like as Outlaw becomes viable and becomes its own thing, it doesn't have to be completely joined with what Dan and I want personally. And even what Dan and I want doesn't have to be 100% aligned. One of us can continue on. One could maybe exit at some point. It's all negotiable.
I have another client friend that talks about, like, he's the guy that take it from 1 to 20 people. He is not the guy that take it from 20 to anywhere else. Yeah. And he realized that in his life. And so when he even starts stuff up and he gets other people involved or looks at selling it, he says that right up front. He said, I'm not that guy. You want to buy this, I'm out, and you're taking this forward. Yeah. And I think that's pretty cool to have that self-awareness and say, this is either what I want to be doing or this is all I'm good at. And, I'm going to stick to that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people are kind of gun shy about admitting, or it's because there's so much pressure to just be I'm going to take it to the moon. And as you start, and that's why some of these conversations with VCs are so interesting, as you start kind of hinting at that, you get a range of answers, and it actually can really become just an open conversation. And sometimes, and this kind of goes back to the essence of our product too. It's just that idea of being really forthright about what you want, what the other side wants, and seeing if there's actually a deal there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's pretty intriguing.
Yeah.
So, Evan, backing up a little bit, just, you're talking about kind of the start and the concept and everything. Really start to see, you had the example where you went through the process, in a number of different ways with the contracts and realized that this was an opportunity. How did you turn that into, a minimum viable product and then go from there? What did that look like in the early stages?
Well, so Dan and I are constantly joking that we both love building products so much that by any measure, we way overshot. Whoever our market is, we way overshot MVP. But we have, I think, a way that I like to look at that, kind of break down that answer, is what constitutes a big deal whether it's financially or just kind of in the life of a company. The answer to what's a big deal for us is dramatically changing and evolving and growing every couple of months, I would say. I think when we started, we had, again, starting with 2 people, we spent like a good year or so just hacking on it ourselves and prototyping and putting it in the hands of friends, and had a lot of freelancer friends and kind of very small business scenarios. And so we still had it still was a big deal in those stages. It's a big deal to have a product at all to use. It's a big deal to use it ourselves for our first couple of contracts. And it was a big deal to have, when you're really starting from nothing, to have anyone using what you made successfily and paying you for it is a big deal. Even if they're only paying you 20, I think our first price was like $20 a month for very, very, for single users or for very tiny businesses. But we very quickly discovered that the real, there's still an opportunity space for that market. But I think we were gravitating towards much bigger companies and it's a bit of a different problem because the really, really small companies, they don't even have contracts. Their problem is more for one, they're not usually the sender. They're usually the recipient. And if they are the sender, it's once every 2 months that they happen to be in control of sending a service contract to a new customer. But most of the time it's inbound. Someone sends them a DocuSign link and they just sign it and cross their fingers. And so we couldn't even really solve that problem for them. So we started going up market. And I think as we progressed up market, serving bigger customers, that the answer to what is a big deal for us changed dramatically by orders of magnitude. Initially it was, oh my God, someone's going to pay us. Someone signed on for a year to pay to pay $240 for this thing for themselves to use. And then, a few months later, it was 10 times that. And then a few more months later, it was 10 times that. Now we're getting, I think we found our real sweet spot now, which actually was the vision that we pitched and talked about in our seed round with our lead investor, which was mid-market, which we kind of, and even that can be a moving target, but we said there's so many businesses out there who are in that, excuse me, who are in that kind of just not huge companies, but solid real companies range, call it like 10 to 50 million in annual revenue, 50 to 500 employees. They just have their act together and they use contracts every day. And there's so many businesses like that. And being able to, and for them, paying an annual rate of 10 to 25,000 for just a system that meets their needs is easily, any way you slice it, whether it's about cost savings or improving deal flow and upside, it's so easily, or just about being a repository for their 2,000 contracts that they've signed already over the last 20 years of doing business. Any way you slice it, it's easily justifiable. And there's so many of those businesses out there. There's a huge addressable market of that segment. And so now it's no longer a big deal when we get an inbound lead or an outbound lead who, one of those businesses who says, yeah, we've got 15, 20 users. and we're looking in the 15K annual or something. It's like, cool, add it to the pipeline. Now it's the order up, the next order of magnitude, the 50K annual deals of edging into enterprise. That's a big deal. So I think, sorry if this was a long-winded answer, but like it changes, it changes through the years, and it's good. We try to make a practice of taking snapshots of that, of kind of asking ourselves every couple of months, kind of what gets me excited, what's a big deal. And it's not always about a sale or a customer, but just like, what is a big event from our perspective as founders, and it's cool to see the answer to that getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it's a fun evolution.
Yeah.
This is kind of just randomly on my mind. We're working with a software now, and one of the things that I see, and I'm curious from your perspective, because I think your industry's got to have some decent competitors, and even some behemoths in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And I know with these guys, we've been kind of talking about like, okay, we keep finding some more competitors out there, and some that are pretty well established, others that could easily take their software's functionality and add it into what they're doing, and quickly evolve because they've already got thousands of clients. How do you handle that? And I'm asking this more from like an almost emotional rather than tactical standpoint, of that you got to hit these like barriers or these places where it's like, ooh, am I really going in the right direction? Or, is this harder than I think it is? How do you, as a founder, go through those cycles and keep yourself motivated and, get past some of those things that are like scary in some ways?
It sounds like you're kind of saying, how do we think about the competition?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the basis of it.
Yeah. I think Dan and I, now we have a great marketing and sales, great marketing team and a great sales team and customer success team at this point, who all they kind of funnel the information about how are others describing themselves, making sure that we're kind of competitive in those regards. But at a kind of gut level, I would actually say I don't really think about the competition. I think about the customer. I think about the prospects we're talking about, and whether we going back to that purpose, that kind of product-driven purpose, whether we're meeting the needs. We have lots of people, whether it's inbound or outbound, who are pretty self-aware and sophisticated about their needs. Because again, these are real businesses now, and they've got legal operations people and in-house counsel and VPs of ops and sales and stuff whose jobs rely on these processes. And so they'll come to us and say, we need something that does this, 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 and this. And then we kind of turn around and say, well, we do all those things. And, a couple of things we do a different way, and say, well, we're comparing you guys to these others. And so we that then the competition gets in, but it's just a very problem solution mindset. And I always kind of say my mantra is to follow what works. When you see that someone comes in the door and says, I need this, and you sell them that, and then they're happy, and then they ask for something else, or you get 3 more requests for an adjacent feature that would solve a different flow or a different use case. We say, well, we're 100% on these guys, but we missed the mark. We weren't able to fully cater to this other one or to these prospects, or we're losing deals because we don't have this thing that someone else has. So let's build that thing.
Yeah.
So again, it's very because we're so product centric, and myself and Dan, it's not just easy, but it's actually fun to check those boxes basically.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah, and then the as far as the competition goes, because I think because it's so product forward and we're so hell bent on really solving this problem fully for customers, that shows in our reviews. And so we have a lot of really, really incredibly happy customers, which gives us great rankings on the software review sites, which is where our best prospects are coming from, and comparing us to the competition. So again, it kind of goes back to purpose, and just really being dead set on solving that problem, but also having the humility to know when you get it wrong. You know, when you build things a certain way, kind of going back to that overview thing. You know, we in our early, I don't know how long, maybe year and a half, we were very, at least Dan and I, and then as we kind of had a sales team doing pitches and demos, we were very bullish on that overview feature. And then we kind of realized this is what, even though we think this is valuable, it's confusing people. They're so used to just seeing the contract. Like, forget, like, just because we built it doesn't mean it is the right thing to showcase. Certainly not in the first conversation. It's like, it's just too confusing. So make it optional and take it out of the demo. Don't even mention it until, until a year later, when someone is already using the rest of it successfully and says, hey, what about that overview thing? So it is a constant. I think I briefly referred back to just having no ego about it. Dan and I are adamant about that, both just personally between the two of us, and I think we kind of like really, I don't even want to say enforce, but just kind of influence the team about that. That like you've gotta take feedback. You can't learn if you think you're always right.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of startups fail because of that. You know, the founder has that ego and they don't want to change and aren't willing to be wrong, you know, and so they go into the marketplace with this strong idea and try and force their clients into their idea rather than shaping to what their clients' needs are. No, it's a recipe for failure, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you have to have those experiences in order to improve. But you have to learn from them. I constantly, and at this point, that mentality is really baked into certainly our product development process, and our roadmap is just entirely customer driven at this point. Just people asking for things and us seeing patterns and what they need, and then kind of putting it in front of them and saying, is this what you meant? No? Okay, let us tweak it a little further. Is this what you meant? Oh, good. But even on the sales front, we just had a new account exec start, and she was a little bummed about, you know, one of the early demos not going totally smoothly. And I said, look, you have to have that in order to learn. Like, you know, as long as you acknowledge it, figure out what could have been better, and learn for the next one, that's a win. You know, that's how you improve. You have to do that.
Yeah.
Expecting perfection right out of the gate, you know.
Yeah, I really love the customer-driven roadmap, you know, and having that mindset for sure.
That's a challenging one. It's a balance because, well, I know Steve Jobs is, you know, the famous other, like, polar opposite, like the customer doesn't know what they want because they can't. There certainly are moments of that where it's like because they're kind of so much in their world, they won't even think to ask for a solution that actually would dramatically move the needle. Yeah. But at the same time, so there's some of that in terms of just the way that we approach the whole problem. But at the same time, needing to, we actually, it's really interesting how we built kind of the order of things that we built, because again, we way overshot minimum viable and built this really advanced kind of fully proprietary contract system. And that was much harder and much more work and not exactly customer driven initially in terms of the core of the technology. But then as we started interacting with customers, we found we really need to build that bridge so that wherever they are today, they can get quick wins and say, you know, I'm looking for some, you know, I need to move these documents from here to here with these people's approvals. And we can say, yes, we can do that for you. By the way, start doing that. But by the way, there's this other thing here, like you might want to check out at some point. And then in a year, they're completely off of that process and everything is automated and magic. But you kind of have to hold their hand through it.
Yeah. It's like Ford, so, if he would have asked people, they would have said they wanted faster horses, and
Exactly.
But it's this mix, you look at Steve Jobs, same thing. I mean, they talk about how the Palm Pilot had been around, and didn't adapt. And then, you had an iPod. And so it's this interesting idea of you have these visionaries that have innovative ideas and can, think outside the current market, but then balancing that with the folks that are in the market and have very tangible needs at this moment. And how do you find that connection between those two things and then keep evolving on it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a number of, at this point we're now, we just very recently, like in the last couple of weeks, hit a major kind of product milestone where Dan and I realized we're actually, from a core perspective, like the core elements of a contract lifecycle management system, we check all the boxes. We're feature complete from a core. There's still a million, V2s and V3s of certain features and ways to tie things together. So there's still no end in sight for product development, which makes us happy. But from a core perspective, it's all there. And so now we can have our whole roadmap pretty much be customer driven.
Pretty cool.
So Evan, obviously you guys are on a great upward trajectory. The team is growing. What would you say you look for as far as when you're bringing new people in, new talent? What are the traits that you're looking for that are most important to you?
It kind of varies a little depending on skill set and area. But I would say without exception, we just need them to be good, decent people. So that's usually the culture fit piece. And I've done some writing on our blog of just our company culture. And like I said, half an hour ago, we're still at a stage, we're still pretty early stage, and everyone knows each other and is really, really invested. And it doesn't work to have people who don't want to work together, and so that I think, I guess I would say high EQ is a big component of that, not having any ego. Obviously there are days, there are little, frictions between people here and there, but, and we're hitting a certain size now where not everyone can know and be close to everyone else, especially now with, full remote and, well, actually we're kind of gradually going back into the office, but still predominantly remote. For a couple months in there were people who we had never even met, new hires that we were working with for a couple months that we had never met. But yeah, I think that just genuine decency, and kind of being in it for the right reasons, being in it to be part of something and to really create value. And well, I guess more, if you're on the sales side, more deliver and kind of exchange value with customers, but not in it. And we kind of referred briefly back to some of the startup culture stuff, not in it to have a big team under you, not in it for the amount of money, the VC money that you can raise, or for just not in it for the ego reasons, basically. And I kind of look at it as there's like the qualifications for the job, whatever the job is, and then there's like kind of the attitude. And we all, as founders and people who are hiring people, you want both of those to be excellent. You want to have the best people with the best attitude, but on startup compensation, packages, which is obviously, there's a lot of constraints there. But given and we do have, quite a few people who are that, but it's when you're operating within constraints, looks like we've got an official addition to the interview. She's been right here this whole time.
Yeah.
When you're operating constraints, it's you're frequently faced with kind of one or the other, where you have someone who's great at the job, doesn't entirely have the right attitude, or has a great attitude, isn't entirely, the best person for the job yet. I would 100% of the time choose the latter, and say the attitude just matters more, because the skills are learnable. The skills are someone who's got the drive and is able to work together well and is in it and is here for the right reasons. They can be flexible, they can move roles, they can acquire skills, they can take feedback. That's a much easier, still not necessarily easy, but that's a better fit for us.
That's great.
It's interesting you mentioned EQ. I talk actually a lot about EQ, IQ, and where do you rank people on kind of that spectrum. But I had this interesting theory that I worked with a buddy of mine that owns a company on, where this idea that if you have a high EQ, you really have to be a founder of a business that you have passion around the industry and product. And as you go towards IQ, it's okay to move away from that. And the reason we talked about it was, we do find some founders that are in businesses where they solved a problem, but they don't really care that much about the industry and what it is. Yeah. And there's a period where that if you're a high EQ person, that it's hard to scale that company because you don't have the passion and you're more of an EQ. But, you can scale an idea you don't like as much if you're more on the IQ side. And so we were just kind of saying, as SaaS founders, it's one of those things that if you understand where you're on that scale of EQ to IQ, it'll also help you be successful if you make sure that you're, on the EQ side, more matching your startup to something that you can have a lot of passion around. And so I don't know, just kind of more of a statement that since you mentioned EQ.
I think I would say just having high EQ is essential to opening up more options, because then you can actually, for one, know what you actually want, and then hopefully communicate it openly, and then talk about it and say, maybe the founder does want to continue on and grow it to 1,000 employees or whatever. But I think a pretty common sort of kind of component of burnout, especially for the stage we're at, or maybe one or two stages before and after where we're at, is there's this pull to kind of be someone you're not, or to even just spend your time, spend your days doing stuff that you don't want to do or that you're just not great at. And if you don't have that self-awareness, and I know plenty of other founders, who a few years in, they're like, I'm super miserable. Even if my business is going well, I'm just stressed out all the time. I'm doing stuff that I'm not passionate about, and and they feel really stuck. And if you're able to say, I guess to give a kind of funny example, I personally spend way more time coding still now than any other technical founder I know. Most of them, and sometimes that's fine. Some don't want to do it. Some are thrilled to kind of be more on the business side. For me, I'm it's not just that I love doing it. It's I'm most valuable there, and I can do the business stuff, but I can also hire people. We 6 months ago or so, we recruited a head of sales, and that's been amazing. Usually the kind of CEO at this stage kind of functions as head of sales, and the constant not even debate, just discussion with our investor, who's like, yeah, you guys are so good on product, keep doing that, but you need someone to kind of run the business side. And I was like, yeah, again, my ego's not wrapped up in it. I don't need to be the one closing. I'm available, like anytime it'll help for me to join a pitch or join a call, absolutely. But you need to be able to know what you're good at, know what you're not so good at, and what your kind of, I guess, strengths and weaknesses are, and also how those things are changing. And I think that self-awareness and communication are essential to do that and not find yourself in that bind where you're kind of like doing something you didn't sign up for.
Yeah, I always, over the years, have really thought that the best folks that I've worked with have great self-awareness. You know, they know what they're good at, they know what they're not, and they're able to be confident in what they are good at and comfortable with the fact that that's what it is. And they're also confident and comfortable with the things either they don't like or they, aren't good at, and they're willing to fill those gaps. And
yeah.
You're one of those people that doesn't have that self-awareness. It's really hard to work with those.
Yeah.
I mean, it just is, because they don't realize what they're not good at, or, they get angry because they're working on things that they don't want to be, and they just don't have that self-awareness around it, and they're really hard to work with. So,
yeah.
It's
founders and non-founders alike.
I agree.
Yeah.
So we're kind of coming up on, an hour. I mean, I just be curious, is there any kind of summary, like, if you were to talk to yourself 10 years ago, one piece of advice for you of like, or something that you've learned that's just been really impactful?
Yeah, well, I kind of did that actually, because this is my second startup, and actually somewhere in those early years, I put together a spreadsheet, and I'm a big fan of point systems, and I had a whole bunch of things that went really well, such as the team and things like that, and the product vision about our first startup, and things that I really proactively wanted to change. And the biggest one, because we were in consumer travel in the first one, and that is, well, especially now, but even before COVID, consumer travel is a challenging space, because basically you're building software and then giving it away for free. And so I think probably the top thing that I said I want to do this differently is, I know that whatever I build, I'm going to be 100% focused and just thinking about it all the time, and putting everything I've got into it. And so if I'm going to do that, and my co-founder is going to do that, let's just sell the software. If we're going to create this amazing product, it's much more direct to build great software and sell it than it is to build great software and get tons of people to use it for free so that this other group can advertise to them, it's just, so if you like map out the value exchange in the business model, I was just like, no, I want to build great software and sell it directly and have a direct relationship with my customers, so that when it's not doing everything they want, they tell me what's wrong. It's much more simple.
Yeah, that's great.
And it goes back to that original kind of purpose and goal that we were talking about, which is why it's kind of boring from a business perspective. But yeah, our goal is just, we make a product and we're selling the product. We want to sell more of the product to get to the point where our business is viable.
I don't think it's boring to want to solve a problem and do it really well. I mean, that's what great founders are, problem solvers. So
yeah.
Nothing boring about that. Tony, anything else that you have that you want to add in, or?
No, I'm good. I just want to thank Evan for his time. This was fantastic. We appreciate you spending, the full hour here with us, and
Absolutely.
A lot of good stuff. So we will certainly pay attention to Outlaw. So I encourage everybody who's watching to go check out Evan's site, getoutlaw.com. And Evan, thanks again for joining.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thanks so much, Evan. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you
All
soon.
right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.